stop paying your rent? What do you do then? Is that worth the risk? When looking at properties online, have you ever wondered to yourself, is it going to be more affordable to buy something that currently has a tenant or buy something that is vacant or owner occupied? In today's video, we're actually going to break down what's happened in Mississauga in the month of April to actually show you the difference between a tenanted property and a owner occupied property, and we'll also throw in that vacant property. Believe it or not, there's a substantial difference between purchasing a property that's owner occupied and tenant occupied. So if you're looking to buy a property that's tenant occupied or sell a property that's tenant occupied, stay tuned throughout this video so we can break down not only the tenant laws, but also the difference in price and if it's worth you actually pulling the trigger to sell your home with a tenant or buy a home with a tenant. So now let's get in the video. The first thing we need to discuss is the tenant laws. If you currently have a property that is tenanted and it's on a contract, let's say it's a 12-month tenanted contract and you're on the 6th month. If you go and sell this property, whoever is the purchaser is going to need to assume your tenant for the remainder of the contract. Especially if it's a longer contract, a 1 or 2 year contract, the buyer is going to have to assume not only the tenant's contract, but the rent that they're paying, and they can't move into this property until that contract expires. If this is the case, for a buyer to come in, really like your property, but now have to wait 6 months to just move in themselves, it may be a big deterrent for them to just look at another property that is going to have an easier transition to home ownership for them. Now, tenant laws in Ontario favor the tenants. As a landlord, you're very limited on what you can and can't do. Can you sell your property? Absolutely, but you do have to abide by any of the contracts that are in place. And if there's no contract in place, you are considered month-to-month tenancy, which means you need to provide 60 days notice from the first of a month to whoever the tenant is that the new owner wants to take possession of the unit. However, there's always the risk that the tenant decides they don't want to leave on closing day or before closing day, even if they've signed what we call an N12, where they agree to leave the premises for the new owner. So it definitely has some risks here if you are a buyer hoping to have vacant possession of this tenanted unit that you've in fact purchased. Not only do you need to abide by a lot of the contracts that are in place between the current owner and the new owner who's out for purchase, but if you want to actually buy something as an investment, you cannot get that tenant out of the property. You do in fact need to leave that contract in place and assume them as your tenant. So if you are not satisfied with the rental income that's coming in monthly and you want to just get rid of this tenant and replace it with a new one, that's actually not an option for you as a new landlord. You need to understand your rights and what you are actually able to do. And in this case, if you're buying a tenanted property as an investment for yourself, you need to make sure that you do not break any of the landlord-tenant rules, and that tenant needs to stay in place for the duration of their contract. The only way to remove them is if you or a family member is going to move into the property, and at that point, when they are month to month and their year contract is terminated, then you can give them their 60 days notice and take possession of the property. Before we dive further into this, if you're interested in making a move in the GTA all the way to Waterloo, feel free to book a call with me. It's the first link in the description box down below. We can have a one-on-one consultation and figure out what's next for you in the real estate market. I help families through YouTube all the time figure out what's next in their real estate journeys. And if you want to be part of that journey with me, don't hesitate. Contact information is in the description box down below as well. Now, the next thing we want to tackle is the way a tenant manages and takes care of a property. So if you're targeting a tenanted property versus a owner-occupied property, the chances that the owner is taking much better care of the property is substantially higher than if the tenant has been living there and they have been maintaining the property to that same effect. If you're a tenant, you don't have the same obligation, unfortunately, to take care of the property. Although it's your home, you should. We find a lot of tenant properties are a lot rougher around the edges. They're more beat up and the tenant is just paying their monthly rent and not necessarily maintaining the whole property. Now, if it's an owner-occupied property, you have a sense of pride that you can tell when you walk into a lot of these units. The owners have taken care of them. They're happy with the condition that they are putting the home on the market versus the tenanted properties. A lot of these landlords are just selling them as is because the tenants have really taken a toll on the units. What does this mean for you if you're buying one of these properties? It means that you are likely going to have to do some repairs and some maintenance on these units before you even move in. If you need new flooring, if you need new baseboard, if you need new drywall, if there's holes in the walls from the previous tenant, maybe the termination of their rental agreement was not great, then you have to deal with the aftermath as the new owner. What does this unit actually look like? So yes, you may be able to get it for a better deal, but at what cost of renovation is that going to be for you? So now that we understand that buying a tenanted property versus buying an owner-occupied property is going to be significantly different, I want to show you some statistics from April 2024 in Mississauga area of what we can actually see. When we're talking about this, this is all theory, but I want to present you guys with some numbers so you guys can be the judges here of what the difference is in selling a tenanted property versus an owner-occupied property or even a vacant property. So let's start off with the owner-occupied properties. We have a total of 209 properties here divided by the three categories: owner, tenanted, and vacant. Now the data that we're going to go over is condo data because we do see a lot more investments in condos than we do other types of properties. So with that being said, we had 103 condo sales that were owner occupied. The average list price was $643,000. The average sold price was $637,315. It also took about 25 days on market to sell your average condo. Obviously, we know what average means. There's some highs, there's some lows. This is kind of giving us the best of both worlds. So the next category we're going to look at here is the vacant properties. Vacant property is nobody is in there. Somebody can purchase it and move in extremely quickly. 15 to 30 days potentially. So it's great for somebody who's looking to buy a property and get in there really fast. $609,000 was the average price point on 86 transactions here. And that was a 29-day on market average that it was taking for these to sell. So vacant properties, about $30,000 less than your 103 transactions that were owner occupied, and also 4 days longer it was taking to sell these type of units. So let's see if the trend continues. We are going to take a look now at what the tenanted property pricing looks like versus the other two categories. Now, we have a smaller sample size here. Out of these 200 transactions, 20 of them were tenanted. So we have about 10% of the total transactions in April that were condos that were tenanted. And the average sold price for these was $595,000. So we saw also another reduction in the average price of these tenanted properties. And your days on market, if you go down to the end of the chart, just at the bottom here, was 37 days on market. So we've seen owner, we've seen vacant, and we've seen tenanted. And when we have the sample size here, selling your owner occupied property versus a tenanted property is potentially a reduction of $52,000 based on the average price point. It's also going to add about 12 days on market. And if you wanted to hop into that middle category of your vacant property, the pricing is just below $600,000, and it's going to add an additional 4 days to the market. Why? Why is there such a substantial difference in the condo that is owner occupied versus the condo that is tenanted? There's a few things. We've already discussed a lot of them here, but we need to understand there is a lot of risk that comes along with purchasing a tenanted property. One of the biggest risks is that you buy a tenanted property because it's such an attractive deal. Maybe you've saved $52,000 by doing so, but the tenant decides to not move out when you need them to move out. That would be a big issue. The second issue that may arise is the tenant decides to stop paying your rent. What do you do then? Is that worth the risk? If the tenant stops paying your rent for a year at $2,000 a month, it's about $30,000. And then you have to deal with the extremely long wait line at the landlord-tenant board. How long until you are able to get the tenant out of that property and start recouping some of your investment? And lastly, when you have a tenanted property and you're trying to show it on the market, tenants can make it extremely difficult to have a media team in there, have the unit nice and clean, do any renovations prior to getting it on the market. So in general, these properties are going to be a little bit more distressed, a little bit more worn, definitely less presentable. And this is going to result in a drop off in price. I'd love to know your opinion in the comment section down below. Would you purchase a property that is tenanted, knowing that there's the potential massive savings here, at least based on the April data of $52,000 on average? Or would you prefer to buy a vacant or owner occupied, knowing that there are less risks to go along with those types of properties? My name is Mike Carpino. I hope this video has given you some insight on the difference between owner occupied versus a tenanted property can be. If you're looking to contact me, click the first link in the description box down below, or find my contact information right in the description below as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I look forward to helping you on your real estate journey, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.